And then, my darling Miss Iceland, your temperature will be down to my temperature, and you will become Mrs. Freeze. Here's your look at McFarlane Toys, Batman the Classic TV Series, Otto Preminger, Mr. Freeze. Kapow! The debonair millionaire Bruce Wayne may seem like your average cool cat, but you'd be wrong. With a flip of a Shakespeare head bust into the Batcave, Gotham City is filled with a rogues gallery of criminals eager to unmask the Batman, but they are thwarted by the Cape Crusaders' own clever ways. In lieu of this review, I've dropped the thermostat in this room so that all of you are getting a cold reception, both literally and figuratively. Before we get a closer look at Mr. Freeze. What are we doing here? Before we get a closer look, though, at Mr. Freeze, let me go ahead and thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys. Yes, that did provide this sample. Yes, that we're about to have a look at. Grabbing the tape measure. It's so cold in here. I hope all of you packed your sweaters. Seriously, I'm probably going to bring the thermostat up in a moment. First, let's measure off the figure. Taking it right to the very top of Mr. Freeze's rather bald head, the figure stands 5 3/4 of an inch tall, or the figure's 15 centimeters in height. I've realized also that renting a Sunday machine for this review probably wasn't a very good idea. Some of you have already taken precautionary measures. I see you starting to light some of the furniture on fire. That's a good idea. I brought up the thermostat, but it's going to take a while for the furnace to kick in. In the meantime, though, let's bring a couple of figures for comparisons. Here's what Mr. Freeze looks like next to Adam West Batman. I think it would be safe to say that they're about the same size to one another. He wasn't, though, as big as this guy. This is the recently looked at Two-Face. Still, like it looks like Two-Face, though he's from the same line, almost looks like he's not part of the same line because he's so much taller than the other two figures. As for the figure's accessories, this is the part that bums me out the most. This figure doesn't come included with this freeze gun. One accessory that any villain would have belonged with having would be the freeze gun that belongs to Mr. Freeze. I get the whole idea that they can't use guns for the mandate that's currently in place. But I do think with Mr. Freeze, you can make the exception because the gun is more sci-fi than it is practical. It doesn't look like a traditional pistol or gun. I think they could have easily, not that I know a lot about what would have been required in order to do it, but I do think that they could have included the freeze gun, as Mr. Freeze clearly needs to have one belonging with him. What he does get, though, instead is, of course, some onomatopoeia, some action shots, some exploding shots, you can see. We have already seen these already with some of the Batman figures, like the Batman Adam West, for example. Came with these little clipped-on pieces. I haven't looked at many of these really on this channel. I hope to be changing that soon. You do get clank, and you do get bonk. And again, examples of onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia essentially is a word that's describing its sound, like clank, like bonk. You can take these, by the way, they're slightly softer plastic. They're only, again, printed on the one side as well. And you can clip them onto the figure's wrists. Luckily, though, for Mr. Freeze, he has generally small wrists, so it's not super hard to clip them in place. I don't even think with the other figures that I've looked at, I've even really displayed them. Now, obviously, if you're going to have bonk on the inside, you're only going to see it if it looks like he's waving to somebody. I usually, or at least the times that I've done this, clip them usually on the inside, because, of course, when he's swinging, that's the thing you're going to be looking at from the outside in. And again, you can do the exact same thing on the other side as well. You can mix and match these as well. Don't have to use necessarily the ones that you're using for Mr. Freeze. But then he has clank and he does have bonk. Again, I'm probably just going to display the figures without them all together. Now, this Mr. Freeze, there's been 3 actors that actually played Mr. Freeze in the 66 series. There was George Sanders, Otto Preminger, which of course is the Mr. Freeze we're looking at right here, and Eli Wallach. You can let me know down below your favorite Mr. Freeze from the 60s series. And while I am a fan of the design of Otto Preminger, he actually looks the best as Mr. Freeze in the Freeze suits. I actually am a bigger fan of George Sanders' Mr. Freeze. I believe that's also the Mr. Freeze that has the hot and cold floors. He would turn off parts of the room as Batman's sitting with him. And simply just by unheating the floors, the room got instantly cold in seconds. Made absolutely no sense whatsoever. George Sanders I would love to see as a Mr. Freeze, but although his Mr. Freeze would have had a more covered helmet, this Mr. Freeze simply just has himself like an ice collar piece. One of the calling cards, I would say, for Otto Preminger's Mr. Freeze is these giant caterpillar eyebrows, which I think they've nicely replicated here for the figure. Not only in its size, not only in the furriness, but also the bright orange color that they've given it as well. He has a very off-colored, obviously as he should be, off-colored skin tone. Nicely done with some additional blues added in there as well for very cold to the touch lips and equally cold looking eyes as well. The figure looks great, but again, I do wish that the figure could have come included with his freeze gun. He does have his ice collar, and his ice collar is actually made of slightly softer plastic. If you're not too careful, it actually only is by attached here and here on the side, and only attached by the tube on the back of his body that goes right to the back of the tank. It's not removable, but yeah, if you're not too careful, this could break off from the side of it. It's again a nice looking representation of Preminger's Mr. Freeze. The suit itself is a little full in the stomach, but again, it looks very much like he did in the series. The silver gloves match that of the ice collar piece. And again, he's got all the little switches here on the front that you would also have in the series as well. There's not really much to be said for the suit itself. You've got some nice matching silver for the boots that he has in the gloves. But other than that, he's got a very light colored blue jumpsuit. I do like the way they've sculpted the back of the body here. Now, again, with these 66 series Batman figures, sadly, all you're going to be getting for articulation for Mr. Freeze or any of the figures that we've looked at so far is simple just straight swivels in the tops of the thighs. Granted, he does have articulation in the shoulders, and I'm glad to see at least they did do that. But again, like I said with the review of Two-Face, I do wish that the figures could have had articulation in the thighs as well. Even if it's not really posable points that are going to be used on the figure, I'd like to think at least that they're there if I decide I want to use them later on. I get more the idea that they wanted to approach this line as classic retro toys, but I'd still rather if they could have put some articulation in the tops of the thighs. Speaking of articulation, for Mr. Freeze here, the head does rotate all the way around. You want to be a little bit careful, of course, because when you're rotating the head, if you're not too careful, it's going to clip against these. And you can see right there, it starts to bend one of them. Again, with the head articulation being as it is, you only can really rotate his head. I've tried my best to lift it up or lower the head, but it doesn't seem to be able to do anything. It could be just the way how close his head is, so close to his rolls in his neck, and how close his chin is also to his neck as well, that really eliminates all possibilities of posability. But that's about all you can really do with the figure. Shoulder-wise, again, I'm impressed to see that they did put joints in there so you can bring the arms out if you want to. You can also, again, take those arms and rotate them all the way around. The suit, when you are rotating them, you'll feel right away that it really rubs to the tops of the shoulders. It almost feels as if you can't even rotate them all the way around. The plastic here isn't soft either, so when you're rotating it, there's a lot of friction that's working against the shoulders, the tops of the shoulders there. But at least he does have the joints in the elbows, in the shoulders. I like that. Speaking of elbows, though, it only has a single hinge in the elbow, but it does also allow the elbow to rotate back and forth. And Mr. Freeze's hands, as small as they may seem, do rotate all the way around. Again, when you look at the hand, this one has a closed fist. This, the gripping hand, definitely looks like it was intended to hold something. So I'm sure, I can only hope, that we are going to be getting ourselves a 66 accessory pack, including the things that were overlooked, unfortunately, from before, like the pistol for Mr. Freeze. More importantly, the freeze gun for or the coin for Two-Face. More importantly, the freeze gun here for Mr. Freeze. The figure does also have a waist swivel, so you can rotate the torso all the way around. And again, when it comes to the legs, you can only hinge the legs forward, or you can hinge them back. I guess you could put him in a comical running pose, but there really is no means to actually keep the figure standing like this. He does technically have peg holes on the backs of his feet, so if you did have yourself like a DC logo stand, for example, I just happen to have here on the side, readily for that, you can plug in Mr. Freeze, and he looks like he could be he's from the school of silly walks. Okay, that's a little silly. The figure also does possess a single hinge in the knee, but does allow at least the rotation of the lower leg. And the figure has no articulation, at least that I can see, in the boots. So it looks like the boots are just a continuation from the rest of the lower leg. Yeah, again, like, it's a really nice looking Mr. Freeze. If I was to look at the Mr. Freezes across the board, all the three actors that played them again in the 66 series, I guess Preminger would be the best one to choose. I mean, the ridiculous nature of his oversized eyebrows like this does make for a more comedic looking Mr. Freeze. Eli Wallach also did have a very similar costume than what we got here with Otto's. George Sanders was slightly different, a little more simpler in design. Preminger's had the better looking suits, but all around I liked more George Sanders' portrayal of Mr. Freeze in the series. Though the lacking of Mr. Freeze's freeze gun left me a little cold, I do overall like the look of Otto Preminger's portrayal of Mr. Freeze not only in the series, but how well it translates here to plastic. The more simpler designed figures are smaller in size than the DC Multiverse figures that we generally look here on this channel, and the articulation is also that's been something a little more simplified, especially in the tops of the thighs. But what you're getting at least here for detail, and what you're certainly getting for the reproduction of these characters from, again, the 60s series, I think we're getting some pretty good looking figures from McFarlane's team. I can only, again, hopefully think that down the road we are going to be getting ourselves, again, wishful thinking more than anything else, a 60s accessory pack. Could be one way that they could sell this in a specialty or comic book store and include all the things that weren't included essentially with these figures in the first place. The biggest one at the top of the list for me right now is Mr. Freeze's gun. They've even designed the hand in such a way it actually looks like it belongs with a gun. Unfortunately, one was not included. What do you guys think, though, of Mr. Freeze? Let me know down below in the comments section. And is this your favorite version of Mr. Freeze from the 60s series? Of the three actors that played him, George Sanders, Otto Preminger, and Eli Wallach, what was your favorite actor to portray Mr. Freeze? Again, I always move a little more to George Sanders because I like the idea that he's in that room that has the flooring that goes from red to blue. Blue means cold. Warm is the place where you want to stay. But what was your favorite actor to play Mr. Freeze in the 60s series? Do let me know down below in the comments section. And as well, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of Otto Preminger's Mr. Freeze. And we can have a look at in this video. If, speaking of which, you enjoyed this video, why not hit it with a like? If you're loving the content you're seeing and are on board to certainly see more 66 Batman stuff, then make sure you hit the bell notification also as well. Lots of stuff coming your way, guys. As always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.